If I were the devil, if I were the devil, if I were the prince of darkness.
I didn't take part in this. I felt it was a charter violation, so I left the room when they would discuss this. I don't understand what we're doing, how it works. We had a lawsuit. City attorney recused himself, and then his office came in, and every step, every decision made in this, whether we gave more money or the strategy, had nothing to do with Mr. Gates, had to do with the attorney that the council picked. And we directed that attorney through the entire process. And somehow we're going back and now, instead of looking at, well, did the council do something wrong? Like I said, I haven't seen this report. I don't know what it is. But we spent all this money to get a report on a case that the council for a couple years voted yes every step of the way. And then after we got a new majority, they decided, well, something nefarious happened, so we need to go back and look at this. Who hired the attorney? Travis, you were here.
The city council did. There was a
Through what office?
through the city manager's office.
Through the city manager's office. And I guess doesn't that violate our charter? I'm asking the person that's in charge of interpreting the charter.
Yeah, it does. And when this question first came up in December with council, I made it pretty clear, as did an attorney I consulted with, prepared a letter outlining that city council, in essence, like it or not, they can't go out and hire outside counsel. It's prohibited by the charter. The city attorney, as voted by the people, has exclusive legal authority. And there are court of appeal decisions on point analyzing Huntington Beach's city charter. And it is what it is. And as I said in December, and I'll repeat it briefly again, that's the way Huntington Beach is structured. You may not like it, and council may not like it, individual members may not like it, some people may not like it, but that's just the way Huntington Beach is. And to violate the charter for some remedy is not a remedy at all, because that injures the city. So, there are ways to handle second opinions and getting investigations done and getting additional legal expertise, and that's all done through my office, and we do it all the time. So any notion that we need to have outside counsel or we need to have our own, excuse me, and especially for some level of independence, I haven't seen the report either, but I will say that Mr. Steele never interviewed me or Mr. Williams, who was the lead trial counsel handling the case, at least as a liaison internally. He never interviewed the trial attorneys who we retained or counsel retained, Edgar Greenberg Gross. Mr. Steele never interviewed any of the attorneys in my office, and he never interviewed any of the council members who were present at the time through 2018 and from 2018 through 2020, who were there during these 10 closed session conversations about the case. So he was hired purportedly over a year ago to conduct an investigation, but didn't interview any of the critical elements that would have been able to speak to whether it was handled or done properly. So the process was flawed from the beginning, from the original charter violation through repeated charter violations anytime Mr. Steele would meet with council. And then ultimately this purported report, that's also a charter violation. It's evidence of a charter violation.
Okay.
Point
Ms.
of
Bolton?
order.
Yes, if I
Excuse
may.
me.
So we're right back where we were in December, and Section 304B says the city council is in control of legal affairs for the city and may hire other counsel. And so
Subordinate to
it
the
is a
city
conflict.
attorney.
It is a conflict. It does not say subordinate to the city attorney.
It was
It's just-
interpreted by the Court of Appeal as subordinate to the city attorney.
That case says, except when there is a conflict for the city attorney's office.
And we hired
though.
outside counsel through Greenberg Gross.
Yeah, but what we're seeing from the report, and so nobody has seen the report except the subcommittee that oversaw or
The council
worked
has.
with-
Council,
It
it was
hasn't
emailed
read
to
it.
council this afternoon, so
Yeah.
everybody's seen it.
Oh,
I haven't seen it.
okay.
That's because you
It
probably
was-
didn't open the email.
Yeah.
It was all sent
If
out.
it was this afternoon, I didn't see it.
Yeah,
no.
that's all been
I
sent out.
haven't seen it.
Okay, so, yeah, so as of today, nobody had seen the report because it
And-
is confidential.
Not only is it confidential, but it's also been one of the issues, a lot of delay. Remember, we kept asking and asking and asking and asking.
For,
Well, like you said, Mr. Steele didn't interview you, but wanted to meet with you and your attorney often to get results or comments back. And
no, there were never any interviews, and any time
Correct.
I had a conversation with Mr. Steele, it was at my request, because I wanted to resolve the charter violations.
go ahead, Dan. I'm not going
I
to
wanted,
have.
I wanted to
conversation.
let Councilmember Bolton finish her comments, and I think we just need to keep moving on here.
Yeah, so it is, the charter is not clear, and that is the entire reason that we were having this discussion about charter amendments. But I hope that nobody believes that this is purely personal and directed at one person, or purely about, charter amendments. Looking at the report, what I saw is evidence of systemic communication breakdowns, lack of oversight. No department should be in charge of investigating itself if there is an issue that is raised about that department. And it's pretty elementary, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of governance. Our charter doesn't provide for that. And so, what this boils down to is not just for now, but going into the future, what kind of oversight and what kind of checks are we going to have in place? And yeah, there's a lot of discussion about checks. Our charter does not provide the level of clarity that we need, because how many months later, 6 months later, we're still having this discussion about what the charter means.
Well, I appreciate that, and I will say that if this were purely about trying to make the city better, I wish Mr. Steele and/or the subcommittee would have honored my request to share his findings with me before a big public display, because I'm always willing to take criticism and input, and I never got that input. And so here we are, and I actually did get an independent review. I have the report right here, in the independent review, which is truly independent,
Yes.
found-
So let me
found nothing
Let me
wrong.
ask you this question about
Yeah,
that review. So
please.
that review said that that attorney discussed litigation strategy with someone from your office, and so it could be inferred that that's a waiver of the attorney-client privilege, which is held by the client.
Say that
So
one more
was there permission from anyone from the city council majority to waive the attorney-client privilege to have a discussion with that attorney?
I guess
I think
I'd-
his name is Mr. House.
that Mr. House did an audit or an investigation or a review of the case.
Right, so was there a waiver of the attorney-client privilege in order to be able to do that?
It wasn't required because he was held to confidentiality during his review, and he's entitled to review it if I commission the review.
Can anybody else waive the attorney-client privilege aside from the client?
The attorney-client privilege wasn't waived.
I don't know how you discuss litigation strategy without waiving it.
I'm not sure what you mean by that. I didn't discuss, I think you're referring to his comment that I was a part of the conversations of litigation strategy during the 10 closed sessions.
He said in his report that he discussed litigation strategy as part of the review that he conducted.
Okay,
at your
I'm not
request.
familiar with that remark.
Yeah, that's what he says
Yeah.
in the, so my question, and I don't know the answer, that's why I'm just putting it out there. My question is, was privilege information a part of that discussion? And if so, did the council majority authorize the waiver of the privilege? All of this confusion and competing reports about what happened and what is correct and what is not correct. We don't have to go through all of this. If we amend the charter so that it is clear, we don't have to
Well,
go through all of this. I don't know how many millions of dollars were spent on the Moorfields litigation. This all originated with that litigation. What I am saying is, what came out of that and what came out of what I see as a conflict of interest situation is this systemic chaos and confusion, failure to communicate. We have a council that didn't feel like it was adequately informed about what was going on. And you know what? It's neither here nor there to lay blame about all of that. We just know what the situation is. The relationship is not, I think everybody agrees that the relationship is not what we would want it to be.
I appreciate those comments, and I agree with you.
That's the whole reason
and
we're
it's-
talking about clarifying it, though. Because with the example about how to interpret the charter, Section 304B says one thing about the council's authority. Section 309 says another thing about the city attorney's authority. And I am talking about the specific instance of a conflict of interest. And based on what is in the report, I just don't see any other way of resolving this other than making the charter clear. So, you know, it was a tough decision for me to decide to want to waive the attorney-client privilege and release this report. But a lot of folks came forward and said, why are you recommending a charter amendment that more carefully defines the attorney-client relationship? And this is the reason why. And so if people want to know, people want to see, I just urge them to read the report.
Well, I can't comment on that because I haven't seen the report, but I will say that there wasn't really any confusion or lack of clarity with regard to our roles and responsibilities for the 10 closed sessions that we had. The previous council never voiced any objection or concern about confusion or clarity. And we have a new council that's retroactively looking back to try to see what was done. Well, your city council made those decisions. And there wasn't any issue then with regard to representation, and with regard to my conflict, I did recuse myself.
I don't have the sense that the city council fully understood what its role was as the client.
You weren't there.
It sounds like I am reading the report that was done by Mr. Steele.
But he didn't interview the critical players. Did he interview Jill Hardy or Lynn Sameta or Patrick Brendan or Eric Peterson? Did he
interviewed the people that are still here on the council that were there.
There you go.
And their understanding, as reported by him, is that they thought that their role was to simply hear updates and approve additional requests for legal fees. And so, you know, where there's a communication breakdown, we don't blame the client. I'm sorry. We just don't do that. And so...
Nobody's blaming the client. I've advised the council not to violate the charter repeatedly, and that's my duty and obligation under the charter.
Okay, so
I'm not blaming anybody for lack of...
We'll have to agree to disagree that, you know, your assertion that what we're doing is violating the charter, we'll have to agree to disagree on that.
Then what's number 22 all about? It basically gives you the authority to hire outside legal counsel.
This is not a conversation. That's not what
No,
we're
it's a great
talking about.
conversation because it's educational for the public.
Let's deal with item 16 first, 17, which is what is the decision about waiving the privilege? Then you can see the report.
Well,
and then you will know, and then maybe we can have a more fulsome discussion.
If I could request the court, if I could request the council consider releasing it to me so that I can actually view it and digest it and come back with recommendations on a response or something like that. But to just blow this up publicly without me having even seen it, Mr. Peterson, if others haven't had a chance to read it either, how are they going to make an informed vote on?
No, they did. They did.
Okay.
They did.
Mr. Peterson had an option. He left every meeting.
So
Yeah, well,
he left
maybe
the closed
wanted
session
to.
meetings where we were
Closed
briefed,
session
where we were
meetings,
briefed
we
on
were-
what the report was. So
And so, because he, shares Mr. Gates's view, which is
fine.
Mr. Peterson's
Prerogative,
right to do. But we have a disagreement about what the charter means. And
We
so
could have gone to court
fundamentally-
and gotten clarity on it in December.
Fundamentally, that's what we need to do, is gain some clarity about what the charter means.
We have met for the last year with Mr. Steele, and I know he's reached out to your attorney on numerous occasions to meet with you.
6 months.
We could have, all right, less than 6 months, 7 months. We could have done this without even having this at all. So I'm just suggesting.
Mayor, I will tell you this, and this is for certain. There have been 2 occasions where I had a conversation with Mr. Steele. Both were initiated by me, and at no time did I ever decline or delay a meeting with him.
Well, he went through your attorney, so I can't
Well,
speak to
fair
that.
enough. But I had also asked at every occasion, through my attorney and directly to him, please share with me your findings.
Well, you know what's going to happen here. It looks like now it's us against them. We have factual information. This was given last year to us based on an attorney that you hired. Is that correct?
Yeah, an independent guy I had never worked with.
Okay, well.
Which is important
Which is exactly
for objectivity.
which is what Mr. Chi did for
No, but Mr.
objectivity.
Steele's different because he's advocating. You can't sit in a seat of objectivity and do an independent investigation and also advocate.
Well-
those are 2 different hats that he's wearing at the same time.
All right, go ahead.
When I got on council and we had our first closed session meeting,
I remember that one.
nobody was introduced as to who they were, their roles. We were asked to do something. There was no closed session memo ahead of time. We were asked at that meeting to effectively make a decision vote on something with very little background information on what the case was. At that point, staff started getting billing. Somebody flagged that the bills were starting to get $1 million+ for a is somewhat
An
an
employment
employment
suit
suit that's not necessarily complicated.
Correct.
And then to find out that why Mr. Gates was in the room, the definition of that, and as we started to get through this and understand that, well, maybe Mr. Gates was not totally recused from that position. There was not a firewall set up. He was still directing. There are things I think in this report that folks need to read, and I think that as this report finally came out and the investigation was done, it doesn't say anybody did anything illegal. This was an operational audit, effectively. What this was to look at the operations of how this case was handled, so the council could better understand how we don't spend $1.5 million
Again.
on a case something like this and pay out folks $2.5 million. And the recommendations out of it are for good governance. And the question was asked, why do we want to make these somewhat esoteric changes to define roles that are in the California Professional Code for attorneys and the bar rules so that our city charter is more in line with the other cities that have elected city attorneys? And so I think that the residents need to read this and understand why and why this has taken so long and why we're at the situation we are at, and to understand that at some point that when something involves the city attorney's office, the city council needs to be represented by folks that aren't in the city attorney's office that have any potential in there. So I think that Ms. Carr wants to say something, and I think we need to keep moving on till we talk to get to the later on in the agenda.
Go ahead, yes, please.
Thank you, Mayor. As somebody who was in the room and who has been through this and who has been a fan of yours, as was pointed out earlier tonight, and our kids are friends. So this is not personal for me. I take that, well, look who's still here. I take offense to that, Michael. I think that you and I have a better relationship than that. So this is really about the position. And we've heard a lot about oversight, transparency, how important it is that we have rules and regulations and things that are clearly defined. So when this talk about not really an investigation, because it's not that,
It can't
but there
be,
were
it wasn't objective.
there was questions about the process as to how we got to where we were, because as we started to do a little bit of digging, there were some questions. I had questions from you, and you agreed that the questions that I had were valid, and you didn't ever dispute that. And you even said, Kim, if these are the questions that you have, then yes, by all means, we should be looking into it, which is what we did. Now, I have a couple questions. with this report that you oversaw, that you dictated, that you defined the scope of, who paid for it?
Well, I didn't dictate it. I
But
didn't
who paid
oversee
for
it. The city of Huntington Beach.
And who is paying for your representation right now?
The city of Huntington Beach.
Did we, as a council, because you work at the guidance of the council, did we approve any of that?
I don't need to. I have a budget and I have the authority.
So here we go. You can go and hire your own attorney if you don't like something, but you are now saying that we can't do the same
It's
thing.
additional resources for legal, which that's my job under the charter. Your
And
job is not legal.
The city manager hired to have this report. And this wasn't, to do a witch hunt or anything. This really was about the process.
Then why
which
didn't
was
he interview
less
everybody he could
than
have interviewed?
50,
And why didn't he release the findings to me earlier?
I have no idea. I was not on the ad hoc committee, and to mischaracterize this as somehow this is personal, what I'm suggesting, and I do agree that you should be able to read this before we have the discussion. What I would like to see is, let's open it up. I release, let's have people, and let's take a half-hour break so that you can read through it. It won't take you that long. You're an attorney. You'll be able to read through this. So then we have the charter discussion. You will understand exactly why we are going forward. So that this is not personal. This is not personal. This is really about process. And so then it won't be this, you're doing that to me and stop attacking Michael. I think our public, our residents deserve full transparency to see exactly what happened and why we are here today. This is not personal. Half hour. Thank
Well,
you.
and-
I'll give you a half hour.
I
If
know-
you need an hour,
no,
well, I'll
no,
wait
no,
an hour,
I-
but I know you're a smart guy. You read these things for a living. You're going to be able to get through this in 10 minutes.
And I appreciate that, and I appreciate the opportunity. What I will say, though, is, and I will look at the report before I comment further, but I'm a little surprised that if this is supposed to be something that we can rely on as to making improvements to make our governance better, that there are dozens and dozens of people who were witnesses to everything that went on and who were not interviewed. And I wasn't interviewed. The very thing you do, and every HR knows this and everybody here knows this, the very thing you do when you investigate a grievance, you interview the subject. And I was the subject, I was never interviewed.
It was not an investigation, though, as Ms. Carr mentioned. It was not. It's an operational audit to figure out.
Okay, but
what
your
the-
attorney just said
what-
today in a letter it was not an audit. It was called an investigation, and when Mr. Kalmick called for it the very first time, back in whatever, a year plus, it was an investigation. So we can talk semantics all we want, but why you wouldn't interview me is
How
shocking.
many people, hold on one, how many people did Mr. House interview?
Frankly, I don't know.
In
I
his
don't
letter,
know.
he says he interviewed 2 people.
He named 2. There may have been others. He may have. I don't know.
He did not interview anybody else, to my knowledge. I do not think that it's going to, get us anywhere to argue over the competing reports. And again, the reason we have competing reports is because the charter is not clear about respective roles, and we do not want to have a repeat of a situation where, because of a conflict of interest, the council, whether it was the council at that point or the council now, it eroded trust between the city attorney function and the city council function. I don't want that to continue.
And
to be
I
the
appreciate
case.
that, but nothing erodes trust between our relationship more than hiring some attorney who gets paid to tell you what you want to hear and drive a wedge between us. Nothing erodes trust more than that.
Okay, yeah.
I'm going to motion to call the question and.
Round and around about that. We can go around and around about that, but ultimately, this is about the relationship between the functions and how this client ended up in the position that this client is in. So if we're going to take a 30-minute,
I'll make.
All right, move it. Okay, and I'll second.
So, hang on, there's specifics, I think. Yeah, Madam Clerk, and I guess City Manager, there is a document that identifies what we are waiving privilege on. Is that clear to staff without having to dictate it publicly?
Yes.
Okay, so by the motion of what we're actually waiving privilege on. So we'll waive, I make a motion to, receive and file the report, its addendums, its appendices, and the executive summary, along with any other material that needs to be published, and waive the attorney-client privilege. Under,
A and B?
Yeah, basically A and B
Okay.
for the report.
All right. And who seconded it? Rhonda did. All right. Ms. Bolton seconded.
The item passes 6-1. Councilmember Peterson voting no.
Okay.
And I have a point of order for,
Yes.
City Manager Zelenka. Where will that be available for folks to preview now or to review now?
Mayor and Council, as I understand from conferring with Travis, that'll be, the information will be posted under this agenda item, is that correct?
Yes, we'll provide it to the city clerk.
On the city website?
Maybe the city clerk.
Oh, okay.
We could do that
Immediately.
immediately, yeah. So if you send it to me,
Yeah.
I'll go post it.
Once we
Yeah, once we receive it. Yes.
Yeah, so we're going to take a recess for 30 minutes.
If I were the devil, if I were the devil, if I were the prince of darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness, and I'd have a third of its real estate and 4/5 of its population, but I wouldn't be happy until I had seized the ripest apple on the tree.
For the streets, freedom for the people preaching peace, freedom for your soul even after you're deceased, freedom of speech, free in your mind, freedom for the soldiers behind enemy lines, freedom for the poor, prisoners of war, freedom like the waves crashing upon the shore, freedom for all standing tall, freedom for the streets, freedom for the people preaching peace, freedom for your soul even after you're deceased, freedom of speech, free in your mind, freedom for the soldiers behind enemy lines, freedom for the poor, prisoners of war, freedom like the waves crashing upon the shore, freedom for all standing tall.
I got the right to mic, to speak on what's inside my mind, desire now flowing from my mouth when I recite my rhymes.
If you want to applaud, one clap. If you want to applaud, one clap.